I think it's safe to say that gaming YouTubers are on the way out. They're irrelevant. Nobody pays attention to them anymore. Nobody watches them anymore. Nobody cares about what they think. It's kind of been crazy over the past several years seeing these people just throw out their nonsensical complaints about Nintendo, about their games, about their hardware, and try and, like, build up a cult following, right? We've seen this with all of these people, Angry Joe, Review Tech USA, Clownfish TV. Like, all of these people are just constantly just railing on Nintendo, near constantly making stuff up about them, making stuff up about the games, making stuff up about the company. And that has resulted in really weird situations, namely the fact that Nintendo games are clearly very, very popular. They clearly do very well. People love them. They're even getting pretty high review scores now, right? The company is clearly doing really, really well, and yet somehow, for some inexplicable reason, we're always in this situation where everybody is just kind of refusing to acknowledge it. We've seen this most prominently with Pokemon over the past couple of years. I've talked about this a lot. But I think it's also really apparent with Zelda, with Mario, with Splatoon, with Animal Crossing. Like, all these Nintendo IPs have reached new heights. They've become extremely popular and extremely successful. And yet, somehow, there's no real acknowledgement of it. If anything, we get the exact opposite, where people celebrate alleged failures from the company. People celebrate the failures of random IPs. People celebrate, like, Nintendo getting attacked online. People like worship other companies, you know, particularly Steam, right? People will bend over backwards to avoid having to acknowledge that Nintendo is putting out the best games in the industry. And it's really interesting seeing people who consider themselves major Nintendo fans, people like Sean Malmstrom, like, try and convince you that, like, Tears of the Kingdom is bad, nobody likes it, and then turn around and praise something like Final Fantasy 16 or Octopath Traveler 2, right? We see this all the time from these people. And more and more, I think, it's leading to a culture where, rather than pushing back against these people who are never really going to change their minds anyway, I think what we're going to see is that, like, ordinary people just slowly backing away from the online gaming space, right? They won't be posting on X. They won't be using YouTube. They won't be, like, using any other alternative sites. They'll just be done, right? They will talk about games with their friends in real life and not engage in this online forum, because the online forum is inherently toxic. It is ridiculous. It makes no sense. The hatred against Nintendo is a very real thing. It's, I think, the major thing that ties every other company and brand together, right? It doesn't matter, like, what the company is or, like, what the fan base is like. It's like all of them will attack Nintendo if given the opportunity. We've seen this happen time and time again with Capcom and the Monster Hunter games, with you know, the Grand Theft Auto audience, the mobile audience, the PC gaming audience. You know, we're doing this thing now. We're going through this process now with, like, the FromSlop audience, where they're trying to convince us that, like, the FromSlop formula is better than what Zelda puts out, right? They've been doing this forever, right? And more and more, it feels as if the narrative is falling apart, but, like, they're not willing to admit it. Like, more and more, they're doubling down on this, right? You know, they've gotten to the point where they're forcing a flavor of the month meme game into this position where it has to compete with Pokemon, which isn't going to end well for it, especially since it was so heavily plagiarized. Like, when you look at what they have to do, you know, when they have to prop up something like Baldur's Gate 3, when they try to sell you on something like Alan Wake 2, when they try to, like, get you excited for Dragon's Dogma 2, and, like, Tekken 8 and Street Fighter 6 and, like, Final Fantasy 16. Like, when you look at all these things, and if you're, like, a well-rounded, experienced gamer, like, you understand that, like, wow, none of this stuff looks good at all for various reasons. Nintendo stops all of this, right? Like, it's not even really a competition, and yet we're seriously expected to shell out like 80 bucks for the, I'm sorry, 70 bucks for Tekken 8, you know, like on a console that isn't on Nintendo. Like, get real. It's not going to happen. I'm really curious to see like how much longer this is going to continue, because it does kind of feel like there is a lot more backlash towards properties that 10 years ago used to be fairly popular. You know, stuff like The Witcher, stuff like Persona, stuff like Yakuza Like a Dragon, you know, stuff like that. You know, more and more, all of the major gaming IPs, the tentpole IPs that people use to weaponize against Nintendo, like, oh, Yakuza is too mature to be on Nintendo platforms. Oh, Persona couldn't run on Nintendo Switch, you know? Like, all these narratives are just falling apart, you know? Like, over and over and over again. And I think, like, considering the diminishing returns that these companies are seeing, like, religiously supporting non-Nintendo platforms, like, it's only a matter of time until people start realizing that, like, wow, the Nintendo games that are coming out around the same time are better than the stuff we're seeing from other companies in general. And that's been happening for a long time. You know, I've been saying this since the N64 days, but it's reaching the point where I think it's becoming undeniable, honestly. And yet we still see a lot of major YouTubers, game journalists, like stuck in this mid-2000s mindset where they'll legit try to convince you that New Super Mario Bros. Is a bad game, right? That they'll try to convince you that, like, Super Mario Bros. Wonder can't be considered a major release this year. You know, like, Angry Joe just released a top 10 worst games of 2023 video, right? You know, an hour and a half of him raging about all these games that were obviously never going to be good to begin with. Like, why did he not spend that time to play good games? You know, why didn't he play Zelda? Why didn't he play Fire Emblem Engage? Why didn't he play Pikmin 4? Why didn't he play Super Mario Bros. Wonder? Right? Why didn't he play all this good stuff that was coming out? Why did he put all of his time and attention to products that nobody cares about? Not a single person on Earth thought Gollum was going to be good. You know, like, that's not some shock. Like, I don't need some YouTuber, like, screaming about me about how, like, some Lord of the Rings license game is not very good and not very true to the source material. I didn't need a YouTuber to explain that to me. And yet, like, that's the position these people are in. Like, all they do is just complain about things that they really don't have any business talking about at all. And, you know, that it's not just video games, right? I feel that way about film. I feel that way about animation and anime. Not so much books. But, like, when I look at these YouTubers, like, I just see a bunch of toxic people trying to grift off of a declining audience. And that's becoming more and more obvious. Like, I think it's going to be very soon. I think it's going to become more and more common for people to address, like, the very real problems with the gaming YouTube sphere. I think people are getting sick and tired of the status quo. I think people really need to start addressing that game journalists, that YouTubers have essentially become game journalists, right? They have the same kind of problems. They get sponsorship deals. They have a priority to shill for certain properties while downplaying others. Like, there is no reason to take a game journalist seriously, a gaming YouTuber seriously in 2024.